So chapter 9 is about the joints, and these are the outcomes. We'll be talking about the joints from the structure to the classification, to the different functions, to the range of movement, and all these. Joints are called articulations, and I mentioned that in the lab several times. And I told you this is part of your exam. You have an exam tomorrow, right? So you should know the articulations. Two bones meet each other to allow the movement. And we are going to divide the joints in two different ways. The structure, what are the different parts, and the function. And the function, most importantly, range of movement. You guys know that I can move this like all the way in different ways, and I can move this just like this. One plane only, right? And I can move this two. One, two. This is only one. This is three. I can move it all directions, right? So these are the different things, functions and structure, but we will start with the structure. So in this joint, here is one bone and there is one bone. What's holding them together? What's in between? If it is fibrous tissue that's holding them together, we call that fibrous joint. If there's a cartilage in between, we call it cartilaginous joint. If there is bone holding them, that's called bony. And then the last one, if there is synovial, which is cartilage and fluid, we call it synovial. These are the four from the structural point of view. From the functional point of view, we have non-movable, slightly movable, freely movable. Okay? Non-movable, what do you mean? How is it a joint if it's not movable? Because the definition of a joint is two bones coming together. That's it. Moving or not moving, this is another thing. The classic definition of a joint is end of one bone, beginning of the other bone. That's it. Okay? Here is an example. Sutures. Don't you see the frontal bone and then the parietal bone behind it? Aren't these two bones? Are and they are beside each other? Can you move it? Of course not. I'm not talking about babies. Can you move it? No. Is it a joint? Well, is it two bones? It's a joint. So this is called immovable joints. And the Greek for it is syn, S-Y-N, means fixed. Arthrosis means joint. Arthrosis is a joint. So synarthrosis, immovable joint. The other joints are partially movable, slightly movable. And this is called amphi. Amphi is slightly. You have to know these terms. The last one is dia or di, D-I, means free. Freely movable joint. Synarthrosis. This is immovable joint, and it's basically because there is fibrous tissue or cartilage or something holding the two bones strong enough that doesn't move. And the examples here are sutures. The sutures, do you remember these sutures? This is a joint. It counts as a joint. Is it movable? No, it is not. So this is synarthrosis. Gomphosis. Your teeth inserted into, like here in the mandible. Bone inserted in a bone. Is that count as a joint? Is it two bone? Yes, it's a joint. Does it move? No, it does not. It shouldn't. If it is moving, this is an issue. Synchondrosis and syntosis. If there is a cartilage in between, and I will show you the details. So suture is the first thing. All these sutures. Here is one frontal bone, parietal bone. In between, there are fibrous tissue holding them together. It doesn't move. So this is called synarthrosis. Gomphosis, bone in bone, teeth. Example is important. What does it mean, an example? This is what I'm going to ask you about. You will see a lot of examples. Okay? Plus, degree of movement, and why is it moving or not moving. So gomphosis is basically teeth, bone in bone, teeth, and there are fibrous connections as well. Next is synchondrosis. Chondro, does anybody remember what's chondro? Cartilage, yes. Chondrosis means, syn means fixed or immovable. Chondrosis means there is cartilage that's holding it. And this is basically there is a rigid cartilage in between the two bones that prevent them from moving. And the example of that is the vertebrosternal ribs with the sternum. When they meet the sternum or in the vertebrae back or the epiphyseal cartilage, this is another thing. It doesn't move. If you have a child, teenager, epiphysis is considered a bone, diaphysis is a bone. As long as they are not continuous, we count them as two bones, isn't it? Epiphysis is here, diaphysis is here, and there is cartilage in between. Is that considered a joint? It is temporarily a joint, right? Because there is cartilage in between. So it is two separate bones, and there's cartilage in between. Can you move it? Of course not. You cannot get like 12 years old child or 15 or something and get the epiphysis and the diaphysis and move it. It's not going to move. So it counts as syn chondrosis or syn arthrosis, and because of this cartilage, it's syn chondrosis. So syn arthrosis is the big thing. Joint that doesn't move. Why it doesn't move? Is it fibrous tissue in between, like sutures and gymphosis? Or there is cartilage in between, like synchondrosis? Or syntosis. Syntosis is bone, bone, and then in between become bone as well. Example, same example that I gave you, epiphyseal plate. Isn't it cartilage? At age 25, what's going to happen to it? It will become bone itself, right? But there is a line, epiphyseal line. Do you remember that? I showed you in the x-ray. So there is a line. So is it still? Yes. And what's in between? Bone. Bone, bone, and bone in between. We call that syntosis. You will be asked about this, okay? So you need to understand what each one of those means and an example of it. So this was for the synarthrosis. The next is amphiarthrosis. Amphi means slightly. Amphiarthrosis, slightly. So what is this? Same thing. So remember, we're talking about the big classification. It doesn't move, slightly move, freely move, right? Syn, amphi, di. This is the big classification. The next step is what is in between the bones, fibrous tissue, or cartilage, or bone. This will give us the subclassification. For amphiarthrosis, same thing, slightly movable. Okay, what are the different subtypes? Just tell me what's in between. Slightly movable, but what's in between? Is it cartilage or fibrous tissue? Same thing. Like syndesmosis and symphosis. These are slightly movable. Syndesmosis is a ligament holding them together. Symphosis is fibrocartilage in between, and symphosis. Do you guys remember when I showed you the pelvic girdle? Do you remember in the front there was a cartilage? I showed it to you, right? Remember that cartilage in between those two? This, if you try to move it like this, if you try to move it, it does move a little bit. And there is a cartilage in between. So we call that symphosis. Okay? I know these terms are kind of hard, but you will be asked about this. You have to know it. Syndesmosis versus symphosis. Synovial joint, and this is the one that's di. Di means free. Diarthrosis. The synovial joints. And the synovial joints simply all long bones of your body. Every single long bone. Do we know the long bones? Does it have to be actually long by measurement? No. What do you think about this? Is this a long bone or a short bone? It's a long bone. And what is this joint? Synovial joint. Any joint between long bones is synovial joint. And we have a lot to talk about in the synovial joint. But first of all, if you have two long bones in between synovial joints, just like this. And of course, long doesn't mean long by measurement, it by description. Okay? So what is this synovial joint? This is a freely movable joint, end of one bone covered by articular cartilage, end of another bone covered by articular cartilage. They come together. There is fluid in between. There is a capsule covering it. This is the basic structure, but there are other parts that we need to know. It's more complicated than that. The first thing that we have is articular cartilage that you have to have it. Remember I showed you in the picture this cartilage covering, and I told you if this is eroded, it will make movement harder, osteoarthritis. If it goes away, it's immovable, and you have to replace. Remember this? So it has to be there, soft, smooth cartilage, so that there will be no friction between the bones. Otherwise, it's extremely painful. You have to have cartilage covering it, and this cartilage is called what? Articular cartilage. Articular cartilage. The cartilage of articulation. What's articulation? What articulation means? Joint. So this is the cartilage of the joint. Look at this. Can you see this blue here? Here is one, and here is one. This is called articular cartilage. Okay? What do we have in this space? We have fluid. That's called synovial fluid. Okay? And then there is a capsule, membrane, and then capsule covering from outside. These are just the basics. We still have more structures to talk about, and it's important. So let's say this up one here, this is the femur, and this is the tibia. Both of them need to be covered by articular cartilage. There is a space. The space is not empty. It contains fluid called synovial fluid because this is synovial joint. And then there is a synovial membrane, and there is a fibrous capsule outside. And outside of all of that, there will be ligaments. And what's a ligament? What's the difference between ligament and tendon? Ligament, bone to bone. Yes, ligament, bone to bone. Tendon, muscle to bone. Yes. So this is ligament to reinforce the structure. The classic example that you have to know is this knee joint. You have to know all the structures of the knee joint. Not only all what we mentioned, but also you need to know that there are extras. Like specifically in this one, there is an extra piece of cartilage that exists in between the bones. I'm not talking about the articular cartilage. This one that's attached. Here is bone, femur. This is the tibia. There is an extra piece in between, and this is called meniscus. Okay, specifically in the knee joints, because the knee joint is keeping the whole weight of the body. That's not it. You also have fat pads within the joint to act as a cushion. So if you stress it, it absorbs the shock. You also have some bursae. What's the bursa? The bursa is like a bag, like this, that contain also synovial fluid. So the synovial fluid is the fluid filling this space, okay? But there are pockets, separate pockets, and these are called bursae or bursa, aside from the ligaments that surrounding it. Here is the synovial fluid. We will talk about it next time.